So just very briefly, an introduction about Shropshire Archives. I'm conscious that some of you in the audience know Shropshire Archives quite well, but some of you may not. We are a modestly funded county archive service, but we are also Archives and Local Studies. We're based in Shropshire Archives in Shrewsbury. We're currently open 20 hours a week, and our full-time staffing is 8.3 at the moment. Plus, we have a couple of people doing records management. We already have significant engagement with volunteers, as you can see from that slide. This is in-person volunteers, as it were. And what we wanted to do was really to build on that and take things to a different level. This is just to remind us of perhaps what the traditional archive volunteer might look like in terms of conservation work, in terms of cataloguing work. As I say, what we wanted to do was really to move on. And we had the opportunity through an Arts Council funded project. We were able to get the virtual volunteering element of the project in part of the museum funding that the Arts Council offers. So the project was always a joint archives and museum project. And what we were trying to do, as it says there, was to find new ways of engaging with volunteers. We also wanted to widen the volunteer base, perhaps from, the traditional model, as I've already shown you. With the funding, we had an 18-month project. We had 2 part-time staff, part of the project, a project manager and a volunteer coordinator. While we were working on this project, we also had a Heritage Lottery funded project for in-person volunteers. So we had sort of complementary volunteering projects going on at the same time, which I think definitely had its advantages. In terms of the sort of infrastructure that we were using, we have already got an extensive online catalogue, which was originally funded by the Heritage Lottery, and this again is a joint catalogue. It includes Shropshire Archives information, it includes information from both the County Museum Service and voluntary museums. It also includes the Historic Environment Record. So we already had a structure which could take information from CALM, from AdLib, from modes, and indeed from spreadsheets, from Excel, if necessary. On the system, we've got about, it does say there 250,000 records. I think we're up to more about 500,000 now. And the online catalogue has the capacity to have images, thumbnails, which then you can get the full entry and you can get a high resolution image. We also have a image cloud functionality on the site, which is another great way of being able to sort of share images. I think one thing that we're learning about putting material online, and this was echoed a bit this morning, is how that needs to then feed back into how you're doing the cataloguing, because people are finding things in a different way. So it needs to impact really on particularly indexing, which is something in Shropshire that we've never done a great deal of. So we're aware of how that's had to change things. So when we came to be thinking about the online system, we wanted to build on what we already had, which, as I say, we've already got a system which was able to cope with these various online systems, and we were able to work with our existing sort of software developments who are Orange Leaf Systems, who are actually based in Shrewsbury but have quite a national involvement now. They did the projects at the Keep, they've done various projects in Scotland, Wales, so they were the ones who actually came up with the website for us. In terms of how the technology works, as I say, we'd already got this mechanism of taking information from various databases, transforming it into sort of XML and then putting it into the site. And this is what Heritage Heroes does as well. What we think is maybe unique. I mean, it'd be interesting if anybody's aware of another project that does this, but what our system does is that the information that the volunteers work on then goes back into our core catalogues. So it goes back into Calm, into AdLib, and so on. We're not creating another website that just sits there independently. This is all about enhancing our core cataloguing work. And I think that was always our intention, and there's been pros and cons, really, in how it's actually worked out. So this is the website. As you can see, we've got a sort of range of different projects that cover both museum and archive catalogues. We have got a YouTube video on the front page, which was really a result of we finding people don't read instructions. So we thought, well, we'll try and get them to watch something. You know, it's had varying success. We also have a little community element, you can see there, which rather sadly is empty. And this is something that we found, that we set up this part of the website. We hoped people would communicate with each other. And to be honest, that hasn't really happened. People have communicated with us directly, but not so much with themselves. That's something that hasn't quite happened yet. It may do, or it may just be that people don't want to do that. We have also got a leaderboard where people can, if they want to put their names down, you can see how many records individuals have recorded and edited. But again, if you look at that, you'll see that an awful lot of them are anonymous, because I think a lot of the people who engage with archives probably aren't so interested in getting their name out there. Okay, so just to give you a bit more detail on the range of collections that we have included in the project, you can see the long list there. The ones that have been most popular, not perhaps surprisingly, have been particularly things linked to the First World War centenary, so the field diary that we put up there. We've also got local newspapers, which have been pretty successful. There were others which I was very surprised hadn't been of interest so far. Particularly, we've got a really nice collection of lantern slides from the museum, and we were just asking people to describe what was on the image, and that's had very limited take-up. I think it's interesting just to sort of see that there is such a range of response to the information that you put up there. So, just to show you in a bit more detail a few of the projects that we have included. This is a sort of school essay, a sort of dissertation that was done on Wellington. And in this example, we were just asking people to transcribe, you know, what is fairly standard mid-20th century handwriting. So that was quite an easy job for people to do. And, you know, we found that a number of people have engaged with that one. This one, Roman coins, this was another one we thought, wow, people are just going to love to have a go at Roman coins. And we were completely wrong. For whatever reason, we haven't engaged with the Roman coin people out there, and there's been very limited interest in that one. Whether this, and again, this may be a bit of a recurring theme, we were asking people here to sort of catalogue, to describe, and whether that was just a bit too much as opposed to just copying. I'm not sure, but that does seem to be a bit of a theme. And then, as I mentioned, the World War I field diary. This has perhaps been the most successful one, and if you go on the site now, you'll see that we've actually completed all the volumes just recently, but we have left that one up for the moment. And then the one that was perhaps the most technical challenge was the newspapers, because obviously these are big, your standard early 20th century newspapers, and to get those images online, we did actually have to come up with a technical solution, an additional server that hosted the large images, because obviously with the Calm in online catalogue that we have, that just has much smaller images. But we were able to overcome that, and I have to say this was an example where we actually did have a supportive relationship with our council's IT department, which is perhaps a little unusual, but we have one guy who happens to be a family historian, and maybe that's the key. And he's been really helpful, enabling us to get this. So that sort of moved us on in terms of hosting large images, which we wouldn't have been able to do before. And then just to say a little bit about how we've promoted the project. Obviously, it's an online project, so we thought, right, when we start off, we will promote it all online, we will use social media. And interestingly, that had limited success. We've actually found that it's the traditional things, it's talking to people, it's having leaflets, it's engaging with some of our existing volunteers, because what we're finding is that people who volunteer with us in person also want to have a go at this when they're at home. So I think we've learned quite a lot about that. And as I say, also the link to the national events, the First World War, made a big difference in terms of the engagement that we were able to get from people. So moving on to the lessons learnt. As you can see, there's a few there. The first one, I think when myself and a colleague in museums, we had this idea about online volunteering, we thought, oh yes, we'll just get people to catalogue, we'll just put the stuff out there and people will catalogue it. What we didn't realise was that to do that, you've actually got to catalogue it a bit yourself to start with, plus you've got to digitise it. So there's actually a lot of processes to go through before you can offer it to people. So it's very different to if you're getting volunteers to help you out in person. So I think that's a big lesson that we've learned. We've had a lot of interest, a lot of people who've registered on the site, probably 400 or 500 people have registered on the site, but the numbers who've actually done anything is probably more in the dozens. So I think there's something there about, you can get a lot of initial interests, but in terms of converting that into people who really engage with it, that's a different level. I think you have to be very clear on what do you want to get out of it. Do you want to get out a transcript? Do you want to get out a catalogue entry? Do you want to get an index? We deliberately, with this project, wanted to try lots of different things, and I think that's why some things have worked and some haven't. But I think going forward, we've got a much clearer idea now about what works. I think transcriptions, people like those, can be very simple. We have got a 17th century recipe book on there, which is much more difficult. But if people are just copying it, they can't really go wrong. If you're asking them to actually catalogue, that's a lot more, you're demanding a lot more from them, and it can be much more challenging. I think with the project, we did engage with a range of partners. We worked with voluntary museums, and some of those engaged a lot more than others, to be honest. We did need to integrate it into the existing volunteer programme, and we have managed to achieve that. Both this project and the Heritage Lottery funded project I mentioned have both ceased now, so both of these projects have had to be incorporated into a very small core staff. And we have managed to do that. And then last but not least, I think my lesson is that there's definitely demand out there. It's just how you tap into it that you need to be very clear about. And then lastly, please let me know how you got on through the usual channels. Thank you.
Thank you.